This is Sunday School Wine Radio with special guests Fossil and Fawn. Welcome. This is Season 1, Episode 1 of Sunday School Wine Radio on Talkcast PDX. With your hosts
Mallory
and me, Martin, on a show bringing you the people and personalities who are stirring things up in the wine world of the Pacific Northwest. So, you know when Portland used to be weird? Everyone was writing articles about how quirky it was, and there was Portlandia and all that stuff.
Yeah, the dream of the 90s.
Yeah, all that stuff. And now that's kind of disappearing. Now the articles are saying Portland is growing up and, you know, it's all changing. Although when I look around my neighborhood, it's just the fact that all the weirdos are getting priced out of it. But anyway, I was thinking that one of the spaces where weirdos can still flourish is the wine industry here.
That's true. The Willamette Valley can still very much be kind of a wild west of winemaking, where winemakers can allow themselves to go off and follow their obsessions and kind of just do whatever they want. Which brings us to our guest today.
Oh, nice segue there, Mallory.
Thank you.
Yeah, and these guys have a slogan, which is "Get weird, suck less."
Jenny Mossbacher and Jim Fisher from Fossil Fawn. They've been around for a decade making wine in the Willamette Valley. They've been named Wine Enthusiasts 40 Under 40 Tastemakers in 2018. Congratulations. Welcome, Jenny and Jim.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, is weirdness something you embrace?
I mean, I would hope that for anyone, weirdness should be something you would want to embrace. I actually think, I was thinking today that probably weirdness is the closest to normalcy that anyone has. I think everyone's weird, right?
Coming from someone weird. Like,
I don't
only
trust anyone who's
would
not
say
weird,
that.
I think. What's the Who quote, right? Like, you know, hope I die before I get old. There's that one, but it's like, maybe, I'm going to make a Who quote up. Don't trust not weird people.
I think that's a good one.
Yeah, they said that.
They
Right.
said that.
Who self-identifies as being normal? Like, are they, like, does anyone really
Only,
feel that way?
like, weird people.
Yeah, right.
Sure.
Yeah. Right. I feel like weirdness embraces us rather than we embrace weirdness.
So is it yourselves and your wine that are weird? Is it?
I think that our wine is an extension of our personal weirdness. That I think that it would be artifice to feel like a normal person and then try to make the kind of wines that we make. It's an expression of us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to market wine to other people. I mean, so unfortunately, right, so the wine that we make is our art, but because of the world that we live in, it's also our product that we sell to make money to, you know, eat macaroni and cheese or whatever we want to eat. And the thing is that I don't know how to sell to other people, so I just make wine that I think would interest me and Jenny, and then hope that some other woebegone individuals also agree. That's pretty much the idea. So, you know, I don't necessarily think of the wines that I make as being like, I want to make something weird, although the implication of get weird, suck less is there. But I just want to make wines that I like, that Jenny likes.
Yeah, that I don't think that you can make wine for an imaginary customer, or if you're doing so, that I don't know exactly how well that's going to pan out. And so it's sort of the idea of like, well, where does the weirdness end and me as a person begin? It's one and the same. And so the wine is that way, where I think that the wine is weird because we are weird, and we can't really make it any other way.
Yeah, it's an extension of yourselves.
Yes.
I love it. There's like, it blurs.
Yeah.
Where does the wine end, or where does Jenny and Jim end and the wine begin?
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, to the extent...
Hopefully the bottle, but, you know.
Well, there are some bottles that, for better or for worse, actually have my my visage on it. So I think that really does begin to blur that line.
Yeah, we might talk about those later. We were
Yeah.
going to talk about labels. We have a wine in front of us right now. What do we have here?
All right, so in your glass, I'll hold it up for the cameras here, is the 2020 Do Nothing Oregon Red Wine. So this is a brand new release. It is not even out in the market yet, but will be slowly here in Oregon over the next week and in other locations starting next week and beyond. So this is, I believe, how many years have we been making this now?
Since, I believe 2006 was our first vintage?
16?
Oh, 16, yes. 16.
2016,
Wow.
yeah.
Time travel.
Wow.
Time
Yeah,
travel.
2016 was our
Yeah.
first vintage of
Yeah.
this. And the whole idea, the naming of it and how it kind of started out was we wanted to make a wine where we theoretically did as little as possible and could still end up with wine. So it was a bit of a thought exercise. And this particular vintage is a reflection of that kind of style we've created. So it's 100% whole cluster carbonic grapes, of course, and this is predominantly Pinot Noir. So I think it's like 55% Pinot Noir, and then I'm trying to do math here. So 55 plus 35 is a number.
Terrible.
Is that 90?
I think it's 90.
Yeah,
That
that's
sounds
90. So
right.
35% Chardonnay. So 35% white grapes, and then 10% Pinot Gris, which, depending on how it's made, obviously, as you have educated many listeners, is a white grape or a pinkish grape. So basically, this is our attempt at making something light, fruity, quaffable, drinkable. I don't want to use the phrase, the GG phrase, the glue phrase.
Yeah,
'cause-
don't say that.
yeah, I know.
No, it's
Don't
not
say that
on.
on this show.
Yeah, I know. So it's meant to be kind of like interesting and light and fun and fruity, but also still have some interest to it, to not just be purely juice, to have so like to me, like right now on the nose, it's like has this like really like kind of like almost like stony rocky thing happening there. It's not just Hawaiian punch, but it's mostly Hawaiian punch.
Yeah, mostly, but not completely.
Yeah, exactly.
And you could chill it and drink
can
it in
chill
the
it
summer. It's
and
like
drink it in the summer.
perfectly seasonal.
Nice. How hard is it to make a do nothing wine when you do nothing?
It's actually kind of easy. I feel like that I should be like, reveal, it's actually way harder than you think. No, it's not. Honestly, like, Do Nothing is a really fun wine to make in terms of how it works in the context of our overall production, because it is carbonic maceration, which means that we put it into like a vessel or a tank where there is no oxygen. It's just fermenting, kind of the grapes are fermenting from the inside out. You can kind of take the slow cooker approach where it's as I like to say, the it's like the old 90s infomercials, like the Ronco, like set it and forget it. So it's like you package it up and you put it into this vessel where you've evacuated all the oxygen, and then that means that you don't have to worry about things like, you know, daily punch downs. You can't touch it. And to me, I think that is valuable, because then I can't mess with it if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And so you really are forced to set it aside, while then you are focusing your efforts on maybe fruit that is coming in the door during harvest, you know, at the time. And so that is an exercise in restraint. You know, that you can't do too many winemaking things to it, because it is going through that carbonic maceration process, which I feel is hard, the restraint aspect, but then is easy, because then truly you don't have to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's in this state where it's protecting itself, and if it means that you press it on one date or a couple days later or a week later, you're still going to be okay. It doesn't have the same time sensitivity to the way that our other fermentations work.
So what you're saying is anybody can make this?
I would
Yeah.
hope so.
Yeah.
I certainly hope so.
Okay, I wanna take it back a bit, almost to the beginning. So Jim, your family still owns a vineyard,
Correct.
but did own a vineyard when you were a kid, and that's where you used to work, I believe.
So I grew up, I'll hold up the bottle here, at a place
Oh.
called Silvershot Vineyards. When I was in high school, my dad, my mom, my aunt and uncle my grandparents and cousins, we set about planting a vineyard ourselves. So we went to some neighboring sites. This is just west of Salem in an area known as the Eola Amity Hills. And we went to some neighboring sites and collected pruning wood in the winter. And we started our own nursery. So we had 10,000 little baby plants that we grew ourselves. And the following winter, we went out and planted it. And at the time, like I said, I was just in high school, then going into my first year of college. And I had literally zero interest in wine. It could not have been anything that I cared about less. Like at that time, I was probably wanted Milwaukee's best ice, i.e. the Beast, or some kind of horrible, slightly malted beer that would make you be really incredibly sick. That was actually what I was looking for, was a beverage that would make you feel mostly sick. And so wine can do that too, don't worry, but not our wine.
But you found that out later.
I found that out later, right. So I had no interest in it. But I think kind of flashing forward a few years, I lived in a few different spots. I lived in Tokyo, or outside of Tokyo, and then I lived in Los Angeles. And I finally decided to move back home and get back into the wine industry. And that is essentially how I ended up meeting Jenny. We met in this beautiful, terrible industry.
It's kind of, I think it's kind of interesting because you hear a lot of stories about, kids of winemakers, or they have a vineyard or something and they grow up and that's all they want to do and everything. But you weren't like that. You just you kind of buggered off around the world.
Correct.
And then came back and thought, well, I'm going to do this.
Yeah,
it's like we got a vineyard. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, when I came back and got back into the wine industry, it was with a distributor here in Portland. And I got the job because my brother worked there. And even at that time, I really didn't have a ton of interest in wine. So it took a while. It took actually working in the wine industry to find out that I not only liked wine, but I loved it. And I wanted to make this my existence, which, when I say that now, feels very fatalistic. But that's where I'm at with it still.
So it's interesting. So it sounds like it wasn't even connected to the fact that your family had a vineyard. It was just that's almost like a coincidence, or just a
happenstance.
How funny happenstance. There you go.
Yep.
Good word.
Except for the nepotism part where he got hired to the
that made it a little easier to get in there, but
sure.
wasn't the driving
just to think
motive.
if your brother had been selling golf carts instead. Be in a different place.
Yeah, you would be.
It's entirely possible. My brother was a professional golfer for a period of time, so that could have happened.
Yeah. In another universe, I'm sure it is happening.
We should all just think about that for a moment.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah. I'm sure he does.
Jenny, in your own words, you did a very expensive art degree.
I did, yes.
And so when you were younger, did you want to be an artist?
Yes and no. I like making art, and I still do. However, I think that even in the midst of pursuing my very expensive art degree, I had the perhaps kind of practical part of my brain screaming regularly, what are you doing? The idea of becoming a professional artist, I think, is a very lofty goal that is not achievable by many people. And so I think that, and so what ended up happening is that halfway through my very expensive art degree, I took a part-time job working at a winery. And that was where sort of the path diverged, where I knew in my head I had to come up with a plan B, which was actually probably more like a plan A. And knowing that I would get this wonderful art degree and then not do anything with it.
Am I right in thinking, I might have this completely wrong though, but I thought you were like the scientific brains of this duo.
So it's an easy mistake to make. But our cellar mates, Ross and B. Malouf. So B is a scientist. She has her degree in materials science.
Yeah.
She's a materials science engineer.
Yeah.
So B is a scientist.
No, it wasn't that.
Oh.
I think it was because one time we visited you. I think it was because Jenny had been doing some lab things or something, and
Sounds about right.
It looked like she was like the.
It was all for show.
Mad scientist.
All for show, entirely. No,
Yeah.
I'm a dummy when it comes to most of that stuff. But it's interesting because I think that you have to learn the practical aspects of winemaking, and that even though there is the kind of floofy, artsy, fartsy part of it, there is also, like we're making a commercial product, and so we have to make, technically sound wines as well. So
you have to have a lawyer, which shout out to
boring.
Judy Parker, our lawyer, love you. And you have to have like an accountant and a bookkeeper and all these things that like you're like, I don't want to do any of these things
There-
except for Judy Parker. She's awesome. but-
Yeah, there's a lot of very unsexy aspects of winemaking.
The cleaning, the drains.
The cleaning of the drains,
Like
the
that-
shoveling, the cleaning of the press.
Those parts are even, though, still somewhat enjoyable because they're still connected very much to the craft of winemaking versus doing bookkeeping
Yeah, the
and
accounting, yeah,
the accounting.
definitely.
Really, the accounting
Yeah.
and the paperwork is the part that is the unfun but very necessary evil of winemaking.
And it's like a question that I think about when you talk about the thing of cleaning stuff, the more menial tasks. Like at what point, as a business grows and you make more wine and you hire employees, at what point do you stop being the winemaker and more like the executive chef?
Yeah.
Where, for me, that's not something I want. I don't want to be the person who's just like filling out work orders and, working on compliance. That seems terrible. And at big wineries, that's what a winemaker does. They don't have to do the day-to-day tasks. So I think for both of us, the idea of being actively involved, of being the people doing the punch downs, of being the people, doing at least some of the cleaning, still is
Keeps you humble.
And
Like,
it's part of it, right? I want to touch it. I don't
Yeah.
want to not do this.
Yeah. You want the hands-on experience of
Yeah.
actually making the babies.
It's parenting,
Yeah.
right?
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. That I want to be a winemaker and not necessarily a business owner in that, I want it to be in that order instead of the other way around.
Yeah. I like that.
Something I've been thinking about just randomly to do with winemaking. Is there a strong emotional component to making wine?
Usually a lot of anguish at the time. This is mostly the emotion.
I think if I think about this, and again, not to be too precious, as my art, as the art that Jenny and I create, it's hard for me to not be too sensitive about it. And so there's a lot of emotion involved in that case that I care a lot. Too much, probably. Like, I'm sure that there are winemakers out there who probably spend their time on like Wine Search or Vivino searching for like negative reviews of themselves, which I think is like insane. But I'm obviously like probably to a fault really thin-skinned, and so I guess that emotion is real. Is that like, I mean, I understand that there will be people who don't like our wines, and at times I don't like all of them, but it's also really hard hearing bad news. I mean, I really like care and love, and like I'm very persnickety.
Which is interesting because as someone, like, speaking for myself with an art background, I feel like that I would not necessarily characterize this as being an art. I mean, in the sense that there's a lot of, I see it more as a craft because there is that kind of separation of, say, producing a painting or a piece of music versus wine, where there are so many variables that are out of your control comparably. And so your role, in my mind, is like more of a stewardship process where you're really, wine doesn't make itself. Like, there's definitely an authorial aspect of being a winemaker and directing like what we're doing, how long we're pressing it, or how long we're leaving it on the skins, etc. But I think that I'm able to separate myself a little bit more from that, knowing that that there's a lot of the aspects of the base input, the grapes, the season in which they were grown, especially in a year like 2020, is a real like you gotta let go kind of situation. And knowing and having, I think, a little bit of that barrier makes me a little more, I think, open to potentially some of the criticism that Jim has difficulty
you're
with.
like, the wine is not me. The wine is also the grapes and the land and the weather and the yeah.
Yeah,
totally.
you're making the best of it, how you can. And also that there is sort of the commercial scale process of it as well, where the art being something that is this really kind of intimate connection between you and what you're producing, versus this, because when you really see what 10 tons of grapes looks like, suddenly you're really met with sort of the totality of like, wow, okay, like this is an industrial process and not just simply like me playing around in a sketchbook or something,
whipping up a chicken dinner or something.
right? Yeah, that you're really, and that you are involving other people in the endeavor as well.
So when you get that criticism, Jim, you should just blame it on the weather or the land or the
I see.
Just push it over onto
Yeah.
that.
Or me,
those
I can
things.
take it. I can handle it.
Yeah, we used to have a rule at the last space we made wine at that we would always blame whatever went wrong on whoever wasn't there that day.
Oh, that's good.
That's very good management.
Yeah.
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 And that makes it easy. It was, whomever.
Yeah.
And then we felt better. But
That's
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I have a question about your wines and going back to weird.
Mm.
So, you were telling me like this. Oh yeah, we'll talk about the labels in a minute. But this sort of summer, for example, that
Sure.
has Concord and Niagara grapes, which are like super weird, and something else. What'd you say? Pinot Noir,
Pinot Noir.
normal,
Yeah.
normal
Normcore.
in quotes.
Dad
Yeah,
jeans.
So that's
Yeah.
the norm core
Yeah.
thrown in. So do you seek out these weird quote unquote varieties, or is it something you feel like the universe brings to you? What's that look like? I mean, I didn't mean it to take it like woo woo, but anywhere in that extreme.
There is,
in
yeah,
that spectrum.
I think that there is. I don't know. Do you want to talk? Because I feel like I was talking.
I mean, honestly, it's so do I seek out the weird grapes? I don't know that I do. Sometimes thoughts come to me, but in the case of working with Niagara, there was a vineyard that we worked with for a couple of years that had a small quantity of Niagara planted, and part of what is important to Jenny and myself is working with older vineyards, but also we really prioritize working with organic fruit. And so there was a site that was old, and we wanted to try to convert it to farming organically. So we talked with the grower there, and with our friends Ross and B. Malouf, we pitched the grower on the idea that we would pay him more than he'd been getting paid before by a significant amount, and we would offset whatever costs associated with organic conversion were present, and we would buy the entirety of the vineyard. The gotcha is that the vineyard had the small amount of Niagara planted there, and that was a real head scratcher for Jenny and myself, because we thought, well, God, what are we going to do with Niagara? I mean, it's literally Welch's white grape juice. That's what it's made out of, and it is unmistakably as such. So we got to thinking, and one of the thoughts we had was making a pet nat with it. And then in this particular vintage that we have in front of us here, our friends Truan and Nicole that have a small Airbnb here in North Portland, they also had a few vines growing in front of their Airbnb, and they wanted us to do something with those grapes, and it just so happened a little bit of it was Concord and some other things, and we thought, well, sure, we'll just throw it into this project. And as far as other things go, like, I just feel like maybe if you put yourself out there as making a label with an alien getting a haircut on it or something, that people will kind of come to you. I mean, it seems like it's happened to us on more than one occasion where either we'll get an email or in person. One time Jenny was pouring wine at Everett World Foods, and a guy came up to me and he said, my neighbor grows these weird grapes. Here's his business card. And it was, I don't even know.
Yeah.
It was just
very much the universe coming
Did you
to
go
us.
get those
We
grapes?
did, yeah.
We
So
did.
we worked with them for a vintage. And also I think that what has been of interest to us is that, so for the first couple years of our production, we were entirely making fruit from Silvershot. We were entirely making wine from fruit from Silvershot Vineyards, where Jim grew up, which is just about 15 acres of planted vines, mostly Pinot Noir, a little bit like an acre of Pinot Gris, and then like the tiniest smattering of accidental Chardonnay plants in one block of Pinot Noir. And so for the first couple years of our making wine as Fossil Fawn, we were restricted to these basically two varieties. Like the Chardonnay kind of doesn't count. And so it forced us to, first of all, hopefully get really proficient at making Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris, but then also to start exploring, well, what are the possibilities of these two grapes? How can we kind of stretch them into other wines? Which led us towards making our air quote kind of red Pinot Gris, our skin contact Pinot Gris. We had a vintage where we made a white, like a no skin contact Pinot Noir. So suddenly we take two grapes and we make 4 wines. And that was also the very first vintage in 2016 of Do Nothing, which was we pulled out the Chardonnay of the lot of Pinot Noir and made it, as like a specific component of that first vintage of wine. So after a handful of years of that, you're like, well, what else is out there? You know, you start getting a little itchy to like expand your repertoire. And so I think that it was part of, we had the foundations of getting weird, of making wines, more wines than one might expect from just 2 varieties, but also going into it with an understanding that we didn't necessarily want to make like 30 different wines, that once you start opening yourself to the possibility of purchasing grapes from other places, you have to be careful with like the sort of shopping addiction element of it. Of like, you know, suddenly you're like cruising. It's like online shopping where you're like, ooh, a little bit of something here. Like,
and I think we definitely like branching out, but having worked in the Oregon wine industry for a while, certainly one of the things that we wanted to avoid really was, as much as we love Pinot Noir, we don't want to be an Oregon winery that makes 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 single vineyard or worse single block Pinot Noirs that sell for a lot of money, because having worked in those tasting rooms where you have to sell those kinds of wines, it feels like a farce mostly.
Right. I don't think that Oregon as a wine growing region is quite on par with, say, Burgundy when it comes to, say, like the particular differences of this vineyard, you know, plot that is across the road from this vineyard plot that has, you know, 2 very distinctive styles. I don't think that we're quite there yet. Give us another 600 years.
Yeah, we will be eventually.
Yeah, maybe.
If we have, and we need the monks to move in and start just like doing that.
We
with
actually
their lives
store our wine at a Trappist Abbey just to feel closer to that. Yeah,
yeah.
That's actually
good.
true.
Yeah. I believe you.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
Would not. Yeah, there were no joking about that.
You
It's
could
very
say
serious.
anything, and I would believe you.
It's true. They used to have a pew factory, but the pew business was really in the toilet, so they converted it into being a wine warehouse in the 80s.
Oh my gosh,
That was
that's
very
great.
forward thinking. That's
Monks like to drink. They don't probably care about pews.
yeah,
Just a guess.
yeah. Well, yeah. Whenever we do any kind of wine history to do with Europe in our classes or anything, monks always turn up.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
the monks
Oh,
are
yeah.
the main characters. Main
It's the haircut,
protagonists.
right? Like, why would
Yeah.
you do that to yourself?
I know.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
You need to have a monk on one of your labels. Do you have that coming up?
Yeah.
Is that in the mix?
I think we'll just do the haircut. It'll
The
be
haircut.
The
monk-
tonsure.
the tonsure, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have something?
I was going to say, should we talk about these labels here?
Yeah,
we
let's
keep,
talk about
we keep
the
mentioning
labels.
them.
I know. I feel like we need to describe them to the listeners who are not watching this. But what I was going to say a minute ago, it's like, I mean, you were getting. I don't want to say bored. I don't want to put that word in your mouth, but for lack of a better term, of Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris, and wanting to do something, but you're experimenting with them. But I think, I mean, your first label, from when I remember you back in the day,
Back a long time
it was
ago.
like these labels, right?
Correct.
The surreal, like very for the people who can't see. I mean, maybe you can hold it up for the camera. I don't know
Sure.
how this works, but they're very surreal and kind of. Well, who's that artist that like the surrealist?
I think
I'm
of
sure
MC
there's
Escher.
more than one. Anyway, doesn't
Maybe
matter.
Dolly or like
Yeah, maybe
kind
Dolly,
of like,
yeah.
Yeah,
that
that was,
Dolly.
yeah. So what my point is that
Yeah.
you're also like putting that out into the world, right? It's
Mm.
like you're shopping around for things, getting anxious, but you're also kind of creating these wines that are experimental and these labels that are interesting. That then it kind of works hand in hand, and then some people are coming to you being like, "We have these weird grapes." But anyway, back to the labels. Why don't you? What? It's like, oh, it's me.
Yeah. Well, you obviously have interesting labels. Like Mallory said, there's kind of surrealist landscapes. There was one of illustration of Jenny giving the
that's right
alien a
here, yeah.
haircut. Oh, we have that one.
Yeah,
That's
that
great.
one's a
I love
great
that
one.
one. And then
my
Mallory's favorite.
Yeah, my
is-
favorite is a hot dog with the pizza quote on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Keeping people on their toes.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. So again, I don't know how to market wine to anyone that's not Jenny or me. And with that, I also feel like wine is art. I'm sorry. It's also a product. It's also food. It's also just grapes. But the thing is like with any art, right? Art doesn't have to be for everyone. And in fact, it shouldn't be. In fact, if you're trying to make art for everyone, you're probably not really making good art. So the idea is that we wanted labels that would be, to a degree, self-selecting. I think back like when I met Jenny, I'm not really great at flirting or meeting people. in that capacity. This may be a shock. And so one of my pickup lines, which I think is really is great, and I think people should use this, is what is your favorite dinosaur? With the idea being that if you ask that to somebody and they don't know, or they find the question truly absurd and off-putting, that's fine, because we're definitely not going to get along after that. And that's great. So that's like a self-selecting, self-limiting question. And I feel with our label designs, I wanted the same thing. Like, I wanted to work with designers that I loved. I wanted to try to, with varying degrees of hands-on, hands-off, but always with the edict, like, don't be afraid to get weird. Like, just do whatever as long as it's legal. And
words to live by.
I feel like that was exactly what led us to this point. I wanted wines that were self-selecting, that would either really like catch people's eyes and be like, oh fuck yeah, I want that, or somebody be like, oh no, not at all.
Yeah.
And that's great, because maybe they won't like the wine. I mean, maybe they would, but we're never going to find out.
But you're drawing the people who are like your people.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
What is your favorite dinosaur, Jenny?
It is the Carcharodon megalodon, like the
God.
giant shark.
No wonder you guys.
Yeah.
I bet you were
Right?
like,
Yeah.
well,
I felt really bad, because then she did the reciprocation and said, well, how about you? And then I felt so I probably had to lie at that time. I'm like, and so I just told her the truth, which was
is
just Triceratops, which I know is so boring now. It's I'm pretty disappointed in myself, which is fine. Like, I feel that's a good status quo. Just feeling disappointed in yourself
yeah.
drives you forward all the time.
That is great. I would
Um,
have just said T-Rex. I feel like
T-Rex,
that's the
yeah.
only one I really know.
That's fine.
That is an acceptable answer.
It has feathers.
I feel like that
Oh,
I
really?
wasn't intending on kind of stunting on that question, but he asked and I had an answer, so
Yeah.
That's great.
and just talking about labels a bit more. I know you mentioned on your website it's kind of like band labels, which I thought was kind of interesting, because a lot of wineries, they just have the same thing, or it's like a different color, or we put a slightly different animal, but everything looks the same. But you're like, no, this is my fifth album.
If someone looked at this lineup, they would never be like, oh, those are all Fossil and Fawn wines. They all look completely different from each other, which is great. I love it. But then you can kind of know, because you're like, oh, that's so from left field. I bet it's Fossil and Fawn. Maybe.
So I totally yes, yeah, that is the point.
and that is still a part of our ethos for sure.
One of the things that really, I'm going to tell the story. I'm going to talk fast. So pouring for the general public is one of the best and worst things you could ever do, because you get people who dunk on you without even knowing that they're dunking on you regularly. And I was pouring at the Whole Foods in the Pearl, and this woman came over to me. She probably worked at Wine Kennedy, and big marketing firm, and she looked at our labels and she's like, no, absolutely not. She said, there's no uniformity of the design here. This does not work. And I felt really challenged in that moment. And I'm like, well, we make whatever amount of wine and it sells out, and so it's demonstrable. So people get it. I don't know why they get it, but maybe enough people are addled and fractured in their mind and can deal with the fact that none of these things look alike, and that's okay.
And it's working.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
who is she to say?
Exactly.
Jeez Louise.
The one thing that we did not necessarily, I think, anticipate when we embarked on the idea of having different labels every vintage, and at least particularly for the Pinot Noir and the Pinot Gris, was that you're like, oh well, now I'm also paying to have a new label designed for every vintage, because again, you're like, oh, that's right, this is a business. Damn it. But it's also really fun, because then right now we're in talks with our designer for what our 2020 Pinot Noir is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
So, there is a reason why wineries have the same labels each time, because it's
Right?
cheaper.
Yeah.
It is
cheaper, and I guess brand recognition or something. But I think Mallory's point is right, that you look at a label, you see it's weird, you're like, oh, Fossil Fawn. Our brand is just is weirdness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you get to interact with even weirder people than you by orders of magnitude, which is
Yeah.
always a revelation to be like,
Yeah.
oh, I feel really normal. The guy who designed our Chardonnay label was a relatively famous-ish comic artist. So he had a strip that ran in the Mercury, Village Voice, LA Weekly, all the major alternative weekly papers in the country in the late 90s, early aughts had his comic strip in it. And my friend started working with him as a, I don't know, PA, kind of help him get his life back on track. And it was insane. He had 6 burner email accounts that he would email me from. I never knew who like random person emailing me was about label design and random things. He would send me pictures of himself like with fake injuries.
Oh my god. That's so yeah, you're right.
Costumes,
That's like
Yeah, in costumes, a lot of
extreme
costumes.
You really met your match. In
Yeah,
that
you
one.
definitely pick them. I've got to move on.
Yeah,
I
sorry.
there's a slight, a serious side to you. I noticed. Well, I've not noticed in person, but apparently on your website there is. Because you pay homage to the Kalapuya nations, who were in the Willamette Valley because before they were like turfed off in the 1850s, and I found that's kind of unusual for wineries to acknowledge. It's something that they don't really talk about. So obviously you thought that was important to talk about.
Yeah, because I think that when winemakers love to talk about dirt, they love to talk about geology, they love to talk about terroir, they love to talk about the land, but I think that oftentimes there's a lot of kind of intellectual separation between 15 million years ago, the blah blah volcanic soils, this and that, without really understanding how this fits into sort of the broader context of human history. And I think that something that initially drew me to wine, having a background in art and art history, was that like it's about the story of humanity, and so to kind of leave that aspect out of it, I felt like it's a clear omission. And so I really wanted to have something that was an acknowledgement that made it clear that also as we move forward and work with these sites, that's something that we're aware of, and keeping track of our own privilege as we move through those spaces.
Paying respect the best that you can.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's like it's an imperfect thing, because there's certainly there's still a lot of work to be done between making acknowledgement and making substantive change, but I think that it's about keeping that idea sort of at the forefront so that it really informs our decisions as we run our business.
Totally.
I guess we've got to wrap it up there. I think we could probably go on for a few more hours.
Oh, easy.
With all these bottles to go.
I'm mogged up. I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
Bottle number 2.
Yeah, we
coming
just
up.
got you going. Yeah.
I know.
Still
Yeah.
warmed up.
You haven't even talked about hot dogs
We haven't
yet.
even started. We
haven't
haven't
talked about
pizza.
Pizza or
Yeah.
hot dogs.
It was going to be a Tolkien quote, but I figured that their estate is probably litigious. So it's a quote from the movie Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
What is the quote?
Forgiveness is divine, but never pay full price for late pizza.
You're
Yeah.
the laugh from the
It
other
was going to
room.
be not all wonder who lost, not all who wander are lost. But
Yeah.
they
I
would
love
sue me.
it. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, you'll probably get away with that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jim and Jenny, for
Thank
hanging
you for
out with
having us.
us. Listeners, go to fossilandfawn.com to buy their wines. And do you have a tasting room?
We do, but we don't.
Okay,
So we do have a tasting space. We are open to tastings by appointment with some gotchas in there. But go to our website. It's all there.
There you go.
Or it will be there eventually.
fossilandfawn.com.
That's the one, fossilandfawn.com, or
Instagram.
on Instagram, and we never tweet, so don't worry about
What's
that.
your Instagram?
It's at Fossil and Fawn, all spelled out, because you can't use an
Yeah.
ampersand.
A&D. Yeah.
And don't look at us on Facebook either. We don't,
Instagram, website.
Yeah, Instagram and website, that's the one, or
Yeah.
call me.
Yeah, we'll put your number on the end so everyone can call you.
There we are.
Okay, thanks for listening, everybody. This was Sunday School Wine Radio. Go to sundayschoolwine.com to find out about our membership and the wine classes we have coming up. Then stay tuned for next week, where we have the enigmatic and weird in a wholly different way, Jeff Fear of Golden Cluster. Thanks.